Welcome to the deep dive. Picture this. Burkina Faso, a nation in West Africa, is launching this massive infrastructure project. We're talking $200 billion. But here's the kicker, the bit that's got everyone talking. They're doing it apparently without any of the usual Western aid money. So the big question is, how? How are they managing that, and why is it creating such waves internationally?
Yeah, you've nailed it. I mean, this isn't just construction. It's bigger. It's a huge statement, geopolitically, economically. So our mission today in this deep dive is really to unpack the how and the why of it all. We're digging to our source material, which is titled Burkina Faso's $200 billion Infrastructure Revolution. Captures it perfectly, I think. It really speaks to, self-determination.
Exactly. So get ready. We're going deep on Captain Ibrahim Traoré's, incredibly ambitious vision for Burkina Faso. We'll explore what it means for the country, sure, but also maybe for Africa's future more broadly. And I think you'll find there are some genuinely surprising moments, some real aha facts buried in here. Okay, let's start with the leader behind it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Our source paints him as this revolutionary figure in Burkina Faso. He came to power in 2022, and his promise was pretty bold, essentially to free the country from what he calls neocolonial control. That's a term we hear a lot, right? Talking about that lingering influence, economic, political, from former colonial powers, often tied up in things like debt or aid with strings attached.
Right. And what's really striking about Traoré is his very clear mission statement. He said, build Burkina Faso by the hands of its people, using African solutions for African problems. That's not just talk, it feels like a core philosophy, a real strategic shift. It's about moving away from relying on outside help and towards, building genuine internal strength, taking ownership. It's a theme echoing across the continent, really.
And the biggest, most concrete example of this philosophy, it's this mega road project, $200 billion. When we say mega, it's hard to overstate. Our source calls it one of the largest infrastructure projects in African history. Just think about that scale for a second. It's huge.
Well, the scope is massive, over 6,000 kilometers. That's modern highways, smart roads, trade corridors. Just to give you a sense, that distance is like driving from New York to LA and then almost all the way back again. It's vast. The goal is connect the capital, Ouagadougou, out to the remote regions, but also, and this is key, link Burkina Faso up with its neighbors, Mali, Niger, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Togo. But what's really different here, maybe even revolutionary beyond just the size, is how they're doing it. The focus is absolutely on self-reliance. Things like locally sourced concrete, solar streetlights, machinery made in Africa, and the workforce. 95% local workers, local engineers, local experts, many trained right there or in nearby countries.
So it's clear this isn't just about smoother journeys. It's a strategic move, isn't it? Aiming to boost trade, help rural areas, and make Burkina Faso a kind of central hub for West Africa's economy. The potential knock-on effect for the whole region, for integration, for prosperity, it could be enormous. Okay, so if this sounds almost too ambitious, maybe too good to be true, you're probably thinking, what are the traditional powers saying? The ones who usually fund these things. Why exactly is this project so shocking to Western nations?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting because Traoré's project flies directly in the face of, decades of how things were done. I mean, for so long, the narrative was simple. Big projects in Africa. You need foreign aid, foreign experts, foreign companies. It was almost a given. But our source lays it out clearly. They've rejected those usual channels. No World Bank loans, no IMF conditions hanging over them. And maybe the biggest surprise for some observers, no big French or American engineering firms taking the lead. Instead, Burkina Faso is partnering up with other African nations and non-Western allies. Turkey, China, Russia are mentioned. But the key phrase, the really crucial bit from our source, is that this is all happening on Burkina Faso's terms. That's a huge shift from deals where the lender often set the rules.
It really is more than just a shift, isn't it? It feels like they're trying to redefine the whole development game. For years, the assumption was that the know-how, the leadership for these huge projects resided elsewhere. Burkina Faso is basically saying, no, the expertise is here. We are the capital. It forces a rethink globally, I think, about where capability actually lies, which brings us naturally to the massive question. Where did the $200 billion actually come from, if not from those traditional Western sources? This is where it gets fascinating.
Right, it's not just one source. It's a mix. A really diverse funding strategy, which is quite remarkable in itself. Firstly, a big chunk is from their own national resources. The source material indicates that revenues from gold and other minerals they shot up dramatically after the government took back more control over those assets. Lithium exports are specifically mentioned as being quite lucrative. Secondly, new trade alliances. Deals struck with BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, China specifically seems to have provided a major boost for infrastructure funds. Thirdly, there's significant African investment. Support from ECOWAS nations, the Economic Community of West African States, they clearly see the upside for the whole region if transport links improve. And finally, something quite powerful. Traoré apparently made a direct appeal to the Burkinabe diaspora, people living abroad. Millions were inspired to invest back home through things like crowdfunding and special diaspora bonds.
Wow, so the underlying message is just crystal clear. This is African money building an African project. It really does stand in such stark contrast to, well, decades of development models where the funding and the plans mostly came from outside Africa. Okay, but let's be realistic. A project this ambitious, even with clever funding, must face some serious challenges. What sort of hurdles, potential problems, or criticisms does our source mention? What could go wrong here?
Yeah, absolutely. No project this size is easy, and the source does highlight several risks. First, there's the physical challenge. Harsh terrain, desert conditions, that's a constant battle for the engineers. Then you have internal factors. Political tensions within the country, and even the threat of sabotage are mentioned as real risks that could slow things down or derail parts of it. Externally, there's a big one. The possibility of sanctions from Western countries. The source suggests this could be an attempt to destabilize the economy, perhaps as a reaction to Burkina Faso's new alliances and its independent path. And finally, an economic risk, relying too heavily on those mineral exports for the funding. Global commodity prices can be pretty volatile,
That sounds like a minefield they have to navigate, but what's the government's stance? According to the source, how are they planning to deal with all this?
Well, the message seems to be one of determination. Traoré's government, based on our source, is saying quite openly that they're ready for these challenges. Their approach seems to rely on transparency, strong leadership, and really banking on the support, the will of their own people to see it through.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit then, thinking bigger picture. What are the potential ripple effects here? What could Burkina Faso doing this mean for the rest of the continent or even, the global balance of power?
This is where it gets really potentially transformative. This isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. It could genuinely spark, a new ways of independence and self-reliance across Africa. And we're apparently already seeing hints of that. Mali and Niger are reportedly looking into similar large-scale projects. Guinea's renegotiating mining contracts to get a better deal for itself. Chad and Sudan are exploring oil partnerships that bypass the traditional Western intermediaries. The really grand vision, the big what-if, is if all these new roads and initiatives actually link up, you could see the emergence of a really powerful, integrated West African trade corridor, one that could potentially challenge the trade routes that have historically been dominated by Western interests.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just roads. That line from the source really sticks with you. This is not just a road project. It's the symbol of a new Africa, one that builds its own future. It feels like a very powerful declaration of an intent, doesn't it? And one that seems to be resonating elsewhere. So given all this disruption, this current shift, how are Western governments actually reacting? What's the main response highlighted in our source?
Well, the picture painted is one of maybe scrambling. And definitely criticism. Western governments are apparently quite vocal about criticizing Traoré's alliances, particularly with Russia and China. And they're raising alarms about so-called debt traps, which is a criticism often leveled at Chinese investment, for instance. It really underscores this tension, doesn't it, between the old guard's influence and these emerging economic and political partnerships that are, changing the map.
And the bottom line, as the source puts it, seems to be that Burkina Faso is, quote, finally calling the shots. So perhaps the critical question for you listening is the one that emerges from all this. Will the West find a way to adapt, to accept this rise in African agency? Or will there be continued resistance to this push for self-determination? Whatever happens next, whether there are bumps in the road or huge successes, I think our deep dive today makes one thing incredibly clear. Africa isn't waiting around for permission anymore. It's building its own future right now.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with that final thought, doesn't it? For you to consider, what do you think? Can this mega road project truly remake West Africa's economic landscape? Or will external pressures, foreign interference, try to put the brakes on it again? What we've seen today, digging into this source, is that this project represents so much more than just infrastructure. It really is about self-determination, and it's a clear sign of how global power dynamics are shifting. Definitely a story to keep watching.